that David Grush has made. And we had to dig into this too. We had to look into it. It's a wild allegation. Again, I get it. Catholic Church and UFOs. We've been trying to get reaction from the Vatican. We've been working behind the scenes, and joining me live steps from the Vatican right now is NewsNation executive producer Susanna Pinto. She was previously a Rome-based reporter who has also worked in the Vatican press office. Thank you for being on with us tonight, Susie. I've got to ask you, you've been working on this for quite some time. You're in Rome. What have you been able to learn from Vatican officials about what David Grush had claimed to us in that interview?
Good evening, Brian. You can see St. Peter's Basilica behind me, perhaps the most iconic and powerful symbol of the Catholic Church around the world. And yes, as you said, this is a shocking claim. The fact that the allegation that the Vatican might have known about non-human intelligence on Earth. So I've reached out to the Vatican press office for comment. The Vatican has not responded. Now, that's not unusual. This is a highly controversial issue, and it's not unusual for the Vatican to not want to comment on such a controversy. Also, though, if there were credible information about life on another planet, life in another part of the universe, it would also bring up a lot of theological questions and a lot of debate. And so it's not surprising that the Vatican doesn't want to speculate on this issue right now.
I know you've been trying for at least the last week or so to get a response from the Vatican. Do you expect that something will come out eventually, or are they just saying, like, no comment, we are never going to talk about this?
Well, look, we do know that the archives pertaining to Pope Pius XII's pontificate have been open to scholars and historians. That happened in 2020. Pope Francis announced that he was going to open up the archives to historians and scholars. So that they have been looking into his pontificate. And of course, it was a long pontificate. He was Pope from 1939 to 1958. So far, there have been a couple of books that have come out from historians. They focus more on the Pope and World War II, but that's not to say that a historian or a scholar could continue to dig into those archives and find something. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes out, and that could take a long time because, like as I said, it was a long pontificate, and there's every Pope communicates with a lot of people. There's a lot of official communication with not only heads of states and presidents, but also different associations and parishes. So it'll take quite some time to go through all of that information. Yeah, it's interesting that they are just now releasing within the last couple of years Pope Pius XII's official archive. I just think back to like a presidential archive, a presidential library where they have all the documents. Those are usually only documents for 8 years. Pope Pius XII was there for 20 years. And you mentioned it, the people who have been reviewing the archives so far, and only certain people have been let in, were more interested in other topics related to World War II. It just seems like a lot to go through. I wonder if anyone has even gone through everything to see if there is something in writing related to UAPs from that time period. Brian, I'm sure there's a long line of historians and scholars who want to get into those archives and actually dig through. So, I think this is something that is going to play out over years and maybe even decades. So far we haven't heard that type of information come out, and there's been no information published about that. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes out. We're talking about so much content from a pontificate, whether those are official letters, communications, all sorts of things that a pope does. And of course that was many years ago, but still the pope is a figure that communicates with not only Catholics but the world. So there's just a ton of information to go through. It's interesting, though. I mean, the idea that the Vatican might know something related to this it isn't really that far-fetched. I don't think a lot of people realize that they have a whole unit of the Vatican dedicated to studying astronomy. That's right. The Vatican has a Vatican Observatory that dates back to the 16th century. So for the last 400 years, that observatory has been dedicated to studying astronomy, astrophysics, and really just the origins of the universe. So it's something that not a lot of people know about. It is dedicated to sort of the connection between faith and reason. So the Vatican says that their faith inspires the science that they're studying, and yeah, so that observatory is outside Rome, just not too far from here, near the papal summer residence, and they are very active and they do all sorts of things. In fact, just this summer they resumed their summer school for scholars and also students, undergraduates and graduate students who come to the Vatican Observatory for 4 weeks, and they discuss all these sorts of things, all the latest in astronomy and astrophysics. And that resumed after a 5-year hiatus. They had to take a break during COVID.
NewsNation interview with whistleblower David Grush was the impetus for the congressional hearing. Ross, thanks for being with us as always. First of all, what do you make of the fact that that Susie's been trying to get a comment from the Vatican, and it seems like they're just flat out not going to comment?
It's a very difficult situation. Firstly, good evening, Brian, of course, but I'd say it's a very difficult situation for the Vatican, because if Mr. Grush is telling the truth, and I'm told he is, it's a difficult thing for the Vatican to admit without the US concurring. Just to respond to one question you were raising earlier, I'm told the Vatican does have a very efficient intelligence service, and it's long collaborated with intelligence services like the CIA, providing useful intelligence, and especially in the wake of the Second World War, there was a great collaboration between the Vatican and the CIA's anti-communist efforts in Italy. So yeah, I mean, there's a long history, frankly, of backdoor communications. Even though there was no diplomatic relations until '84, there's absolutely no doubt that people from US intelligence, very senior people indeed, were in the Vatican and indeed in Italy extensively at the end of World War II.
And the Vatican has clearly kept secrets before, Ross. I mean, Susie mentioned that they're now opening up the documents. There's going to be a lot to go through, but I mean, who's to say some of those documents didn't get pulled out?
Well, it's funny, I've talked to a friend of mine, Professor Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who wrote a great book called American Cosmic, and she was one of the few academics who's been given privileged access to the secret Vatican archives. And the way she describes it, it's quite extraordinary getting access. See, there's a whole process you have to go through to become sufficiently credentialed to be able to gain access. And even then, obviously, it's, as you say, it's at the discretion of the people who run the archive what you get to see. There are, just to give you an idea of the scale, the archive runs underground under the Vatican, and Diana's written that there are 53 miles of shelving. That's how much they have in the Vatican archive.
Wow, that is hard to even think about someone having time to go through all that, especially again if the historians were going in looking for other archives related to World War II, they may have not even been looking for this stuff. Maybe that'll change now. You know, since we've started covering this, science and religion, UFOs and religion, I mean, it's a tough topic for some folks who have a strong faith to go there.
Look, 390 years ago, it was the Vatican that tried Galileo as a heretic for arguing that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe. And in nearly 400 years, I have to say the Vatican has actually shown quite creditable openness to science. And in fact, they've held 2 conferences on the possibility of extraterrestrial life, one in 2005 and another in 2009. And back in 2009, Father Reverend Joseph Gabriel Funes, who was the head then of the Vatican Observatory, he actually said that believing that the universe may host aliens, even intelligent ones, does not contradict a faith in God. We are all God's children. How can we rule out that life may have developed elsewhere, he said. Just as there is a multitude of creatures on earth, there could be other beings, even intelligent ones, created by God. This does not contradict our faith because we cannot put limits on God's creative freedom. And everything I've read about the Vatican suggests that a lot of the work they're doing at the moment is trying to demonstrate that there is no incompatibility between religious beliefs and good science. And in fact, they've also held a conference on evolution, the theory of evolution, and actually excluded the proponents of creative design. But there are factions in the Vatican that push the idea that there is a creative design and that evolution theory is wrong. But I would have to say the Vatican's shown an enormous open-minded to science. And I just wonder, I can only speculate, whether it's driven by information that it does possess, as Mr. Grush suggests.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up that 2009 to 2007 time period there, because I was looking today to see what the Vatican has said in the past about this issue, and they really haven't said much since then. There was a Jesuit father, Jose Funes, who said at the time that alien life could be actually extraterrestrial brothers and part of God's creation, which is interesting. They're sort of combining it and not denying the existence that perhaps there is extraterrestrial life. I got to ask you this, though, Ross. We're talking about the Vatican tonight. We talked about Russia over the weekend and George Knapp's letter saying that Russia has this UFO program. We've talked about Italy having a program. Do you think there's going to be more information coming out of these other places besides America? What are you hearing from your sources in other countries?
Oh boy, that's a very good question, Brian. I don't know if it's going to be in the short term, but I do know that countries like France and the UK, and there's also a possibility that I think eventually Russia might be more forthcoming about what it knows. During the course of the research of my book, I spoke to people in Russia, people from the former Soviet military who'd witnessed incidents during the Cold War. And there was and probably the largest ever UFO UAP study that's ever been done was done by the Soviets during the Cold War. It was a 10-year study, and it uncovered a formidable number of unexplained incidents. And there's no doubt at all that there are archives, because some of them were declassified from Russia, and my colleague George Knapp brought some of them back to America and provided them to investigators here in America. But the simple fact is that I think it's going to take a long while for those to come out. I think most of the other countries in the world that have this information, and I've spoken to people who told me that they do have it, are waiting for the lead from America.
Yeah,
I think
that makes sense.
What's going to drive this is for the next few months, I think, is the White House.